Hello and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Climate Action Forum. And today we're going to talk about communities, but not just about communities, about a new way of working with communities and bringing them together to tackle some of the major issues that they face in any particular place. And today we have with us Charlotte Brooks, who works for an organization called LocalMotion. And she's going to tell us about what she does in that organization where she lives in Lincoln. And we're going to raise some questions about that, the advantages of working in that way and some of the issues that arise. So Charlotte, thank you for joining us today. It's good to have you here. So can we start by asking if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
I've probably been, I've got quite a mixed kind of professional background, I suppose, but I grew up in a very small village on the Lincolnshire-Nottinghamshire border with my family who have, they were anything to bring in the pounds, shilling and pence is how we kind of used to talk about it. My dad had a haulage business and my mum actually had a kennels and cattery, but it was a small holding. We had a very diverse portfolio of projects going on, and it was all hands on deck from a very, very early age. I went to university and did graphic design randomly because I was quite creative after doing a foundation art degree, and jobs have included everything from, again, going back and running the small holdings for a while. I did some leadership development for an organisation called Common Purpose in the Northeast. I've worked for the public sector up in Newcastle as well, in the Children's Services Department, and working with children with respite, with disabilities, and providing respite care and young people in the looked after care system. Have been in economic development, have been a director of a charity, and now found myself in this systems change piece for LocalMotion.
So you've done a lot. You moved on from graphic design to working with communities, and you now work, as you say, with LocalMotion. Now, motion in a local area is quite interesting. So tell us what that is exactly.
Well, I will say, first of all, LocalMotion isn't technically an organisation yet. At the moment, it's more of a movement. And the way I kind of describe it is, it's the brainchild of 6 national funders that have come together that if it is curious to explore, if we just do things a little bit differently, what on earth is possible? Recognising that actually, at the moment, for a whole host of reasons, we appear to have systems that aren't working for the majority. They aren't. And I'll refer back to GDP and this element of growth. If that is our be all and end all, and if that's what we're all striving to, how do we have still so many people that are going hungry? How do we still have so many people that are not able to access the opportunities that many of us are able to? There's just a whole host of systems that appear to be broken. As somebody who more recently has been heavily involved in the voluntary sector in Lincoln and Lincolnshire, LocalMotion for me is the opportunity that we always say we want. As a charity, you always want that chance to have long-term investment commitments from funders, so we can really start to make that impact. And actually, not even just the impact of the people, our beneficiaries in a very funder term, but actually our workforce, and how do we develop people locally. It's also almost a blank canvas. We're not trying to shoehorn any existing programs into a funding criteria by a series of funders or one funder that is set on national data that actually isn't relevant to our place. There's all these kinds of things. We are now funded as part of this phase 2, where we are now to connect with people and start to build a full picture, really understanding what on earth is going on in our place that is holding people back. These are all the things that as a charity you say you want all the time and you want the funders to listen to. Well, now they're listening. So actually they've laid down the gauntlet. What are we going to do?
So, I mean, it was established by six funders, and some of the things you talked about, like tackling poverty and so on, working in traditional ways, people have tried to do that. What I don't quite understand from what you said is what is the new way of working? What is different about it that will excite funders?
I think we are listening. Unfortunately, and it could be to do partly with the landscape that we find ourselves operating in terms of short-term funding and investment, but we never get really the opportunity to hold those conversations with the people that are most at need in our place, in our communities. I think the way we're doing things differently is we're not looking at the symptoms, we're looking at the causes. We've been given the privilege of time to really explore and delve deep into what is happening in Lincoln, rather than just trying to be reactive. We've all been so reactive. Cost of living, pandemic, so many different bits and pieces over the last really realistically 4 to 5 years. We're constantly firefighting what we have started to call sticking plaster style projects, where there's a need. So we set up a team, or we set up a project, or we provide a space for people. We don't really understand or look towards solving those wider issues. And a lot of that is just because of resource and this treadmill, this almost survival treadmill to help people. That's why I think this is different.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how you can approach causes when they're systematic. I mean, they're huge. And if is that what you're trying to do, redress the balance by finding different ways of funding, or are you trying to change the whole system by getting people to understand how they need to approach it?
I think it's a mindset piece. I don't think it's just about funding. And I don't think we can just sit here and say the funders are to blame for everything. A bit like we can't say the local authority are to blame for everything. We all have to recognise our part in the system and the part that we've all played in it.
Let's look at what you do, because I mean, what you do is really interesting, and I mean, I'm asking you difficult questions about systemic change, and they're not easy to answer. But one of the things that I noticed that you've done is you had a meeting on poverty, which was described as a person-led approach, and that in a way is the opposite to systematic change, but it is important. But maybe you could explain to us what a person-led approach towards poverty is, and whether you think that's a new way of working.
Well, firstly, I'll just say I think systems only exist and they only get complicated because of the people that are in them. So it is about people as well as systems. In terms of a person-led approach, the Poverty Truth Commission, which isn't a Lincoln thing, I have to stress this is a national network that we're kind of tapping into. It's interesting actually, because as we're approaching now our first full commissioner meeting, and on the 24th of January, hopefully. And there's a lot of questions now coming up. So there's a lot of questions around where are we going to meet, or what will our events look like, or how we're going to work together, or all these kind of things are now emerging because they're on, we're on that countdown moment and they're starting to come to people's mind. And actually my almost standard response now is, well, actually, we'll put that to the group. We will put that to the group. They're not I shouldn't say where people should meet. I shouldn't say how people should work together. I know how I would like to work in a group environment, but that's not necessarily how this group of commissioners want to start together. So even stripping it right back to even the process, how do we make the process of the commission even person-centered and person-led, rather than it being done to them? They're part of it from the start. Then what we'll do, it's about a 2-year, 18-month process. We think the actual commission will run till about August 2024. And there will be regular meetings, fortnightly meetings within that. Some will be very structured, some not so. But how do we start to really delve deep into some of these personal stories so that they can work together to develop a plan and what I would term as a living strategy over the next potentially 2031 in LocalMotion terms first, but actually then 2040 and 2050, so that everyone in Lincoln is united to change the story of poverty in Lincoln by 2050. And that for me is what it's about. It's everybody doing it together.
So the person-led approach is part of what you're doing in the Poverty Truth Commission that you set up. But you also mentioned, and I think I read it somewhere on one of your websites, that you use that commission to listen, to have storytelling and for people to listen in order that you can create understanding, awareness about how people feel and what they experience from poverty. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And actually it's not about economics. It's not just about the economics of it. Actually, how do these stories of struggle actually then relate to other things that are going on in our city? You know, projects that are being launched or funding that an investment that we're tapping into. How does it relate to what's happening in terms of children and young people and their mental health? We're actually really keen to do something long term as part of the LocalMotion kind of journey, to focus on children and young people and understand relationships with things. So things like money or food or themselves in some way. Actually, how do we delve down deeper into that? So it's not a Poverty Truth Commission, but actually the aim would still be the same, to really understand those deep-rooted causes rather than the symptoms along the top.
So if you have people telling or explaining or telling their story about the issues that they face, the disadvantage that they face, and you have statutory authorities there as well, what's the role of the statutory authority there? Is it to listen? Is it to then to come up with the people there a new way of approaching the problems that they have just told a story about?
Yeah, I think it's both. There'll be a group of 15 community commissioners, so people with a story to share, and then there are 15 business civic leaders. What I wanted to avoid was a room full of local authority leaders, because actually in terms of diversity, I want to really be able to do something that's really rich as part of this process. But that doesn't mean to say that actually statutory leaders, that aren't involved directly in the commission, won't have the opportunity to get involved. But it's for these commissioners to listen, but then also work to develop to take this forward. And it could just be there's kind of certain levels of change that the Poverty Truth Network talk about. So it's that individual change that happens in yourself, where actually, it's really changed something in your own mindset. There's the stuff around your own organisation, potentially. So when you go back, actually, what change do you make in your own organisation from the stories that you've heard? And then there's a piece around policy and culture, and how does what you hear then, and those people in those leadership positions, how do they then branch that out even wider?
Now that sounds really important, but you have to start by getting people together. So where do you find the people that you get in that commission, or where do you find in the community people that come into the endeavours that you're following through? Are they individuals? Do they come from groups? How do you reach out to them and get them involved?
Well, I don't think there's a one size fits all, and I can only talk on behalf of Lincoln and Development Plus, who are working with us as part of this commission delivery. I think I probably had the easier job, in the fact that my job was initially to recruit the business and civic leaders. I've met with them all individually. So it's not been about, okay, we absolutely need this person from the city council, or we absolutely need this person from public health, or we absolutely need this person for education. It's people and relationships, and it's about people that I think will come with an open mind. So everybody that has signed up from a business and civic leader perspective, I have met personally and made sure that they fully understand what this journey is around, and it's not a tick box exercise. Actually, how do we keep its integrity? How do I ensure that commitment for that long period of time? Because it is a huge commitment, and people are very, very busy at work. Interesting piece about how people see work. We might touch on that later. But I think actually I've got the easy job at the moment in recruiting those people. We've got probably 12 of our 15 that we need, and at the moment we're pausing. The community commissioners, we have two development workers that are employed by Development Plus that we've commissioned to help us deliver it, but also find those community commissioners. Now, because Alex and Ian are already embedded in our Lincoln communities, they already know people, or they already know of groups that they can kind of tap into, or they know people in organisations that are working with other groups of vulnerable people and might have a story to share. Interestingly enough, a large part of their job is also finding out not just what the story is in the individual, but actually then is that individual in the right safe space to be able to share that story and go through the process, because we really want to make sure we look after people as well. This isn't an intrusive, we don't want to look at it through an intrusive lens on people's lives. We want to bring them with us.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you don't want people to have entrenched positions. Now, how do you do that? Because you might get people from community groups, individuals who are steeped in identity politics and won't see outside of their closed barriers. And you may have local authorities, for example, think that they're the prime mover in everything, and therefore they should be leading, and that's their entrenched position. How do you break that down so you've got a real collaborative network and not a top-down one?
I've actually, I do think it's about relationships again. I think it's about conversation. I've actually not taken on two civic and business leaders who had initially expressed an interest, simply because I was concerned that they didn't fully understand the level of the commitment and didn't really fully understand the openness of the process. They will still get involved and they will still be kept up to date, and they will be still part of our Friends of the Commission group, is what I'm kind of calling it. But actually, as part of the direct process, it's just not the right time or the right space for them at this moment. It's all about them as individuals. I almost want to use the commission to break down some of those barriers. So then when I talk about how do we want to work together, that will be for that group to decide, and then they will hold each other to account. And the idea is, this isn't going to happen. Change in people's minds doesn't happen in the first meeting. This will take a long period of time to really start to see that mindset change.
Yeah, I mean, also community hubs, charrettes, and juries and so on try to do that. And you talked about how you try to work with people in statutory authorities who think culturally in the way you are, and that's important. But what about the voluntary organisations? Because when I look at LocalMotion, certainly in our area, and I'm sure this is true when people set up a network generally, they go to the people they know, and they're usually what I call local NGOs. It's not a fair name, but it's what I call it, which are organisations that have paid staff. Now, most voluntary organisations do not have paid staff. And Paul Hawkins, in his book, Blessed Unrest, talked about in the last couple of decades, the number of voluntary organisations, i.e. without paid staff, have grown, exploded hugely. It's like a new revolution. But they often get left out of the sort of networks you're talking about, because people go for the ones with the paid staff. And so this huge number of groups, which do more probably than anyone else, often are the unheard voices within the voluntary sector. How can you get those involved?
I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because the very nature of a volunteer is that you can't pay them. So it's difficult. It is about engagement. Actually, it's being able to contribute in more than one way. So we obviously do have a core group, and I'll explain a little bit about the core group of where we are now. We have decision makers of the core group that will make a consensus-based decision around large investment and how things get spent and the direction of the local plan. And then we have non-decision makers. So, for example, I'm a non-decision maker because I have a conflict because LocalMotion are currently paying my salary, for example. Our accountable body, Sue Fortune, sits on our core group, but she's a non-decision maker because actually you could say she's got a conflict there because she's holding the fund for us. So all these people have to remain impartial. There are other people on the core group that are non-decision makers as well. Then we have people that are almost like a growing network of LocalMotion people that want to get involved. And they are, a lot of them actually now, aren't necessarily people with paid staff. I'm thinking now there could be 10 to 15 that we're engaging with on a regular basis. Even in terms of just a bit of support from me, because I have the resource at the moment, in sense of time, that aren't part of an organisation, or they're an individual, or they're an activist. Actually, we are reaching those people. And how do we engage with those people on a continuous basis? It's very difficult actually to do both. And I think it's part of the shift and the mindset piece. I know for Lincoln, one of the things that is difficult and why we've lost people along the way since April 2020 is it's hard for people to commit time every single month without any guarantee of any financial investment for themselves or their organisation. That's a really hard thing for people to kind of get their head around at first. I don't feel like we're in that place now. I feel like we've got an established group. We review it on a 6-monthly basis. Nobody owns a seat on the core group as a decision maker. It will depend on the direction and how it evolves. But we are engaging with those people that aren't those normal go-to organisations, but it's just on their terms. How much do they want to commit? Because actually, usually they've got busy lives themselves, either paid or otherwise, and they're not always able to make that regular commitment.
But are they?
So they don't want to get involved.
Yeah, but I mean, are they on the core group, or are they just people you engage with?
I can think of definitely one that she's not part of a paid, she's a founder of something, and she's a bit of an activist and a storyteller, but she's not part of an organisation. And she's a decision maker on our core group.
Okay. So you have that. But when I look at, for example, what's happening nationally, LocalMotion, and probably locally as well, you have a lot of training courses which professional people who are paid love, and they'll go to. The more the merrier very often for them. But voluntary people who are mainly voluntary don't go to those because they may be working full time and they can't afford the time to do that with all the other things they've got. It seems to me you still have to find new ways of working to involve those, which takes you a bit further on from where you're at now. Or am I being unfair?
No, I think this is part of our thinking now as we're starting to formulate our local plan ready for phase 3. So we're looking at how do we find those ambassadors that want to come with us on that journey, and then how do we appropriately recognise and reward, and that could be part of skills development. Skills development could be part of that. How do we do that for the long term? But actually, part of one of our, we've kind of got 3 streams that we're looking at the moment around prosperity, aspiration, and sustainability. But then we also have our community evaluation theme. So that, for example, working with Ivan and his team at Rose Regeneration, they are going to recruit at the right time some community researchers that will come with us on this journey. What we want to do is be able to recognise their contribution in terms of an accredited qualification. So it adds some value to that role and what they're bringing. That's part of our skills development as well.
Okay, so you have the network that you're talking about and the way it's developed. You try and engage with purely voluntary organisations, but you do have statutory authorities on there. At the beginning of this millennium, people used to talk about governance networks, but it sort of fell out of favour because they found in those networks the statutory authorities wanted to play the dominant role all the time. And we've moved towards collaborative networks, which are networks of equal partners. Do you feel you've got a collaborative network, or do you feel you still have the statutory authorities feeling that they should be running the tune?
I don't think we've got that. I think there's still room for improvement in terms of our inclusivity and collaboration, but I don't feel like we are being run by any one party or group of people or department from a local authority. We do have somebody from the City of Lincoln Council who sits on our core group, and he's absolutely brilliant, and he's an asset, really, not only to us but to the city. But he never thinks that he has the majority voice, and I think we could all call him up if ever that arrives. I think we have spent an awful long time building the relationships between ourselves within our group. And actually, if ever that time comes, which I don't think it will, I think we could hold him accountable for that, so that he wouldn't have the majority voice. If anything, quite the opposite, because at the moment, resources are limited for local authorities. They are firefighting themselves. The perception is they have the power. They don't always have as much power as people think they probably do. Actually, if anything, they're quite welcoming to some resource coming into their place to help it flourish in whatever way they think is necessary.
Do you think that's one of the advantages of LocalMotion, in a way, that they get the statutory authorities, particularly the local authorities, to realise they don't have the power that they perhaps sometimes think they have, and that the only way to work is in a partnership setting?
Again, I can only speak on behalf of Lincoln. I don't get that impression from Lincoln, and even Lincolnshire County Council, who obviously we kind of deal with as well as part of the City of Lincoln. At the level that I'm dealing with at the moment, in terms of senior officers, I don't think there's that perception that they hold the power. There might be an odd individual, because again, it's all about people, but the people that I'm engaging with are definitely the people that see the benefit of this kind of relationship and actually recognise that things do need to change, whether that means standing up and being brave and realising you've been doing things wrong for quite a long time. Actually, there seems to be a bit of a shift already, that people are willing to at least acknowledge that things aren't working.
So is that about, and I think you already said it earlier, but just to expand on it, is that about picking the right people, or not picking, because that sounds too controlling, but finding the right people who you think and others think can work in that collaborative way?
To a certain extent, yes. I think everybody comes into LocalMotion at a different point with a different level of understanding, and this is my day job, I'm very lucky, but what I have to recognise is I ask for 2 hours a month, usually 2 to 3 hours a month of somebody's time to be really visionary. Then they get sucked back into their operational vortex where they're fighting fires and dealing with really, really vulnerable people and deadlines and councillors and the political system or whatever. And actually then they're very operational. And then I sometimes in the past have been guilty of expecting them to be sucked back into this very visionary systems change kind of space again at a heartbeat. And actually that's something really hard for people to do. So what I've tried to do, nobody's kind of been ruled out, if you like, because actually they're just not in that place at the moment. But actually, how does LocalMotion continue to engage with them? So actually they come with us eventually on that journey, understanding that you're never going to get everybody to be on that path at exactly the same point. Everyone's going to come into it at different times.
Okay, I mean, if that works, that sounds great. But I mean, I think one of the dangers when you set up any network and you have a set number of people in it, and when funding is involved, you find people are very enthusiastic to come on because they think they can secure funding. And I know from our group, they're being asked to submit funding proposals, and it's those groups on the network they're being asked to. Now, going back to what I said about the unheard groups, the many voluntary groups, they may feel at a disadvantage for that. And if you have people coming on who think maybe there's funding available, you're not developing a new way of working, really. You're just reinforcing what is already there. I mean, how do you, because you work with funders, this is important, how do you develop a system where the funding can also get to those unheard voices and the people on the network don't grab it all for themselves?
Well, again, going back to initial, I think I mentioned it before. I've definitely been meeting as part of LocalMotion since April 2020. It has taken quite a long time to get to this stage where we are, and a lot of that has been about mindset, because I think there was the perception that actually this was a funding pot, and what project were we going to develop and how would it then be paid for? That probably has played a part in why we've lost some people along the way, because actually, as it's kind of evolved, it's become apparent that actually this isn't a funding stream necessarily where people can bid for the money. It's bigger than that, and it's much wider than that. I don't think we've got anybody now that sits on our core group that has that mindset. In terms of reaching people that to make sure that the same people don't get the funding, because they always have access to the funding. That's where our relationship piece works. So who are we not connecting with? We're never kind of done connecting, if that makes sense. We're always going, right, okay, so who haven't we spoken to in this? Who do we need to speak to in this? Who knows someone who lives down their street that might actually have a real passion for this, that wants to get involved? We never almost stop searching for those people. And we haven't as yet. There was just the Poverty Truth commission kind of process to deliver, but actually that was an open process where there was loads of stuff publicly around anybody that wanted to join or put forward an application to help us deliver it. We set up drop-in sessions so people could come and ask me any questions. I set up little camps everywhere around the city, so different organisation groups if they wanted to get involved or just know more, they could come and find me. It did in the end happen to go to somebody that was within our core group, but the interest in it was very low, and because it is something so different, it was hard to kind of get that reach for those people. But that doesn't mean to say we're not going to keep trying. And I think this isn't like a closed group. This isn't, that I would like to see the funding get distributed much wider than anybody that's in our group.
Okay, so that requires a mechanism to do it, and that probably is one of the most difficult problems that you have to face. How do you do it? How do you find out what groups out there want funding, deserve funding? How do you distribute it? I mean, it's a huge problem. So, I mean, we're getting close to the end of the interview now, but I mean, looking at those problems, looking at how you want to work in new ways, which you're clearly doing in a collaborative way, and how you want to reach out to those groups. I mean, how would you like Lincoln, where you work, to look in a few years' time, and what difference do you hope that you would have made?
That's really interesting, because that's the question that we're posing at the moment to Lincoln. And actually, I don't feel like I can answer that, because it shouldn't be what I want Lincoln to look like. It should be what the people of Lincoln who live there want it to look like. So we are currently working with Social Change, who are going to develop a campaign that is a citywide conversation about what does a flourishing 2031 Lincoln look like. And I'm really excited to see what comes back as part of that, because actually I think it could be, I can predict there will be things in there that we haven't even thought about yet. And that's, for me, what I think is really exciting. It will be completely led by those people, and then that will shape the direction of what our local plan will be. But we haven't had that conversation yet with the rest of Lincoln.
I mean, you mentioned having social change in, and I noticed certainly in our LocalMotion, people are brought in are often consultants and doing particular things. And very often those people have their own blueprint that they operate wherever they go. How do you sort of avoid that happening, having people coming in who have a specific way of doing something, and therefore you don't look at other ways?
I think, again, I'll say it again. I think it's about relationships. I think it's about getting to know those people. So when you hold that conversation, you're almost offering them as much of a gauntlet or a blank canvas as we've been in the lucky enough position to be set. What we've done with Kelly and her team at Social Change is worked together to develop it. we've got to a point now where we've said, okay, we're happy with your initial approach. You go away and, you do your projecty bits and you put your milestones in place and come back to us. But actually, we've worked together on it. This has been months in the making. So I don't feel like we've gone out to tender for a campaign and we've had this kind of framework delivered to us. And I think there's a continuous relationship piece there, is that it will just evolve and that nothing is set in stone. Everything that we're doing at the moment is not set in stone in Lincoln, because there is still so much exploring that we have yet to do to fully understand what's happening. And I don't think that will even be done. It won't be ticked off the to-do list. It will be a continuous learning process right up to the end of the LocalMotion journey.
I mean, that also is interesting. And I think that's a good lesson for other people, that when you engage someone like you have with social change, you don't just engage them, you bring them in before and work with the people about how they're going to work. So they don't necessarily follow what they're always doing. So if someone says, for goodness sake, get rid of those awful icebreakers, or, they're boring, they don't do anything, they'll listen to that. Yeah, they're off, go away with them. Yeah, we don't want to know what you had for breakfast and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, that's really interesting you do that, and I think that's a good model, and I think lots of people could learn from that model of engaging the engager so they do what you want rather than what they've always done. Okay, so we come to the end. So if anybody wanted to find out more about what you were doing or to make contact with you, where would they go?
You can visit the LocalMotion website, which is localmotion.org.uk. There is the list of places. So actually you can see ourselves, but also the other 5 places that are very, very lucky enough to be part of this initial LocalMotion movement around the UK. If you scroll down, there is a places link, and you can click on the right link, and all the details are on there about what we're working on at the moment and different projects, and my contact details as well.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for talking about that, because I think LocalMotion is a really exciting initiative, and it will have a lot of, problems and stumbling blocks on the way, because you're trying to do something big, and it's not always easy to embrace the bigness of it when you start.
I think we need to all acknowledge as well that if this is different, it's going to be messy, and failure isn't failure.
That is another message which I always say, that failure can very often lead to success.
It's feedback.
And sometimes success can lead to failure as well.
Yeah,
so, learning to accept that's really important. So that's a good message, I think, to end the webinar on. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling us about what you were doing, and telling us about, the exciting project that you're moving towards, and hopefully we'll get to in the end. And, thank you. And we'll end this webinar now.
Thank you, Francis.